Live on this end, so whenever you want to go.
Okay.
I love the concept, I love everything about it.
Well, welcome. This is the second in a series of 4 on the impact of technology on the life of the church, Christianity, and the world in general. Last time, we looked at social media, the internet, electronic communication in general. And today we're going to focus more on artificial intelligence, AI, including robots as a subset of that. Robots are an underserved population, religiously speaking. I'm going to define artificial intelligence broadly as the ability to organize, process data, and draw conclusions from it in a way that mimics human thought processes. That's been going on for a long time. Even, in a way, even the abacus was that. And remember pocket calculators. You know, that was the primitive beginnings of this phenomenon, and now it's become much more sophisticated and much more intrusive, actually, in our lives. So I'm going to talk about that phenomenon and its implications for church life. So for one thing, computers have made memory external to ourselves. There are a lot of things our brains used to retain that now we rely on electronic devices to retain. I used to be able to remember phone numbers of other people fairly well, and now it never occurs to me to even try. Just pull out your computing device, and there it is. Or names of people, or even where I'm supposed to be on any given day. So memory has, especially for younger people who've grown up with this, memory has, it's not quite appropriate to say it's atrophied. It was never in place in the first place. The synapses were never connected. And that has some implications for the life of the church. And I've seen this in my students. Things that I used to be able to rely that they would remember and would stay in their minds and hearts and shape them, now don't. So for example, it's not just numbers and names, it's also ideas, so that a student might not remember that Plato is associated with the ethereal world. They may have, because they typed that into their computing device. So if they ever want to remember anything about Plato, they just look it up. But because it's not in their own brain, it's external to them, it doesn't shape them. It doesn't shape their spirits. And so also with things as simple as hymns and liturgies and prayers, like the Apostles' Creed. I've noticed that my students can't recite it by themselves. They've got it on a device. If they ever need to say it, they'll just pull out their device. My school has actually dispensed, I don't know what Derry's done, dispensed with written programs, orders of worship. So no distributing of an order of worship anymore. Now it's electronic, which means that folk really don't read it in advance, don't look at it afterwards. It's ephemeral. You just look at it in the moment and then it's gone. And even things like the Lord's Prayer, remembering the Lord's Prayer has become a little problematic. So remembering the things that are important to our faith has declined as memory power has declined. Because if it's in your computer or some sort of mobile device, then it's not in your brain. And then it's not shaping you. It's not shaping your spirit. And also, not only memory has become external, but also logic has become external. Think of computation devices. And now they've become much more sophisticated so that many folk no longer think, well, if A implies B and B implies C, then A is connected to C. They don't think in a linear pattern like that, which is a problem for the Christian life. Because it means that, for example, people don't draw logical conclusions from biblical examples. That's just a small part of this. So I've discovered students who, if they read a biblical passage about Jesus and only indirectly affects the church, but it does affect Christianity in a big way, is that electronic devices and robots are eliminating all sorts of jobs and then causing unemployment. Now often in response to that, the defenders of IA say that, well, it's not eliminating jobs because it's creating new ones. So it's, it might be a taking away assembly line jobs, but it's creating jobs for robot repairers. But one economist calculated that for every 10 jobs that are lost, because the job is not being done by an electronic device or robot, only one is created. Think of McDonald's or Burger King, where now you can order electronically. And one McDonald's I went in that used to have like 5 people, now just has 1. That's happening all over. Often it's called just efficiency. And that's been going on ever since the Industrial Revolution. But now it's become exponentially powerful to the point where a lot of old manual labor jobs are becoming obsolete and are being done by robots. So and a lot of the anger, I think, that's present in segments of the population globally about a bleak economic future, I'm never going to make as much money as my parents or my grandparents, my economic prospects are becoming dimmer. It's not due to what people think it is, which is, well, in the United States, like outsourcing or hiring immigrants. People aren't being replaced by immigrants in the United States. They're being replaced by robots, by and large. And no one really knows what to do about that. Yeah.
I did see a thing, you talked about McDonald's, where there's the actual McDonald's out there where a robot delivers the meal to the table. And if that happens to all these fast food places, you're going to lose a lot of jobs.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it's mostly on the lower paying end of the scale, and those people are getting angry, which means it's going to contribute to cultural polarization. There'll be a population that's probably even will be more angry than it now is, which will lead to contentious politics, which could lead to at least an ideological civil war. Well, oh wait, that's what we have.
How about those high schoolers that all of a sudden won't be able to get a job?
Right. And that's going to anger them. So the church will have to deal with that. What do you do with a population that is becoming increasingly economically dispossessed and marginalized and is angrier and angrier? How can the church deal with the anger, with the polarization, and also with the economic dislocation that's occurring? And that's already well underway, and nobody's really thinking about it. The long-term effect of technologization is going to be the elimination of jobs that used to be necessary, particularly a lot of manual labor jobs. Another problem, it's a moral problem that will have implications for the life of the church, is as robots become more sophisticated and more a part of our common life, there's a danger that we might start to treat other people like robots. As we get accustomed to dealing with robots, that our attitudes and our behavior towards them might spill over in the way that we treat human beings. There's been some experiments on that. And actually, there's a new field called robot ethics. There's a course in that at Franklin and Marshall College about how should we treat artificial intelligence, and particularly robots. One kind of scary a case study was a robot was looked like a human being. It was put on the side of the road in Vancouver, Canada, with a sign on it, "Please take me to the Maritime provinces, to Nova Scotia." And Canadians actually stopped and picked it up. Would take it, 100 miles, then put it on the side of the road, somebody else would pick it up. So that within a month, the robot ended up in Nova Scotia in one piece. The same experiment was done in the United States, going in the other direction. Yeah, you see what's coming.
He didn't make it out of the city.
Yeah. Started in New York, and the robot had a sign saying, "Please take me to California." It made it to Secaucus, New Jersey, and then was found smashed on the side of the road. And the point is that different cultures have different attitudes towards robots, and that they tend to reflect, and that might start to be shaped by the way we treat. There'll be no difference between the way we treat people and the way we treat robots. Maybe some of you are old enough, as I am, to remember the Jetsons. Yeah, remember Rosie the robot, the housekeeper. Well, as those become more and more common, people, it seems, are beginning to show frustration towards the robot. Well, just think of all the times you yell at your computer. And people, screaming at their robots and hitting them. Well, it's not that big a step to move from yelling at a robot that looks like a human to actually yelling at a human. So the robots that bring the food to you in McDonald's, if they bring the wrong food, I think most people will start to insult, demean, slap the robot who's not performing up to speed. And that will accustom them to doing that. And then they'll start doing it to real people, especially as the difference in appearance and movement between a person and a robot becomes less extreme.
And drones are delivering things to people all over the place now.
Oh yeah. And if you get mad at the drone, or try to shoot it down, because it's not functioning properly, then you start to do that to people. So how do you treat robots has become a major ethical concern, and a lot of the impetus is that you should treat robots with respect and some consideration, so that you don't train yourself to be abusive towards people. But if you're abusive towards robots, you're going to become abusive to people. So don't insult Siri when she gets something wrong. Don't yell at your GPS if it takes you to the wrong place, or that street hasn't existed for 2 years. And a particular, I didn't know about this, but one of my students alerted me to it. I didn't know that there were such things as sexual robots. And that's become a major concern. You treat, because the robot is a thing, there for your pleasure. And what if your brain gets wired to think of human beings in that way? They're just to objectify them extremely. And and now we're going to get into something a little more speculative and a little science fiction-y, but it's possible what if robots actually become conscious, have self-awareness, and have feelings? That's the folk who argue that that might be the case. And one projection was that the rate at which technology is going, it could be the case by 2080. Their argument is the human brain and the emotions we have, and the ideas we have, and the consciousness we have of ourselves is based upon a very complicated neural network in where certain neural connections fire, and that triggers other connections, and then we have a thought, we have self-awareness, we have emotions. So the theme there is, if all our emotions and everything in our consciousness is based on neural connections that either fire or don't fire, couldn't that be electronically replicated? It would be complicated, but if it could be, then wouldn't a robot have self-awareness, have feelings, have affect, have consciousness? Already, robots can detect feelings in human beings. It's called modal sentiment analysis. So robots can detect if you're depressed, if you're anxious, if you're happy, and adjust their responses accordingly. Now that doesn't mean that they are happy, or that they're depressed, or that they're really empathizing with you, but they can tell how you're doing emotionally. And maybe it's not such a big step from sensing somebody's affect to actually having affect. Now, if that's the case, then a lot of science fiction becomes no longer science fiction. It becomes a possibility. Think of things like Blade Runner, or the whole spate of movies in which robots come to life, basically, and start to exercise independent action, makes decisions that their creators and owners might not want. They become autonomous and could provide a threat or a boon. And that leads to the notion, do robots have rights? If that ever happens, if robots become self-conscious and begin to exercise some autonomy and some freedom, should they have the same legal rights that human beings do? That's a big theme in a field called the study of the transhuman. And there are a lot of philosophers who are saying, yeah, we gotta expand our notion of what sort of entities are susceptible to being accorded human rights. Maybe robots should, maybe one day they'll vote. Maybe one day they'll turn up in congregations. And then you'll have to, this isn't going to happen in our lifetime, so don't worry, don't worry yet. But you might have special programs for robots, robot support groups, robots who are depressed because they've been abused by humans. There'll be a whole new constituency. And educational institutions are already thinking about that. What if there's going to be a student population out there that is not human? And it's also caused people to rethink animals. Are we all that different from animals? Well, let's say higher vertebrates or dogs. Or is it just that our brains are slightly more complex? In which case the difference between a dog and a human is not one of kind, but one of degree. And so also the difference between a robot and a human would not be one of kind, but one of degree. And theologically, that raises all sorts of interesting questions. Particularly, what is the soul? Could you say that humans have souls injected into them by God, but robots don't? Could you say that humans are the sorts of creatures that God loves and might accept into eternal life with God, but robots aren't? Will there be two different kinds of sentient, conscious, and maybe autonomous creatures? Humans whom God loves and robots whom God does not, because God did not directly create them. It also raises questions about, are humans becoming a little too arrogant and a little too self-idolatrous? That we're doing the job that God used to do, that God used to design and create life, but now we're doing it. And is that the ultimate act of rebellion and usurpation of God's sovereignty, which is something that Presbyterians should really worry about, because Presbyterians have a vested interest in preserving the notion that God is sovereign, God's in control, God's the creator, God's the preserver. We're not, and our job is to obey God. But what if it becomes the case that humans could create sentient, autonomous life? Would that be an act of rebellion against God's power and God's authority? So there's some folk who are already saying that even if we could create robotic life that's conscious, sentient, can act, can make decisions, has emotions, we shouldn't do it, because that would cause all sorts of ethical quandaries, and it would be an affront to God. We're saying we're the creators now, not God. But there are others who say that if we can do it, we will do it. That if technology can, in the past, if technology could achieve something, sooner or later it did, even if society tried to put the brakes on it. I'm thinking of, there's some examples in regard to the military. In the late Middle Ages, when gunpowder was spreading, the army in Egypt, the Mamelukes, who were gifted in archery and swordplay, resisted the introduction of firearms. In fact, they made it illegal. And of course, what that meant was they got clobbered. You know, and to an extent also the samurai in Japan, trying to cling to samurai swords, archery, but the firepower of automatic weapons from Britain, the United States, decimated the samurai. So whenever there has been technology, including destructive technology, somebody has always developed it and utilized it. Here the notion is, if it's possible to create robots that are sentient and conscious and have emotions and free will, it's going to happen, and nobody can stop it. And a few people add, and that might not be such a bad thing. We'd be able to engineer and design a newer, better humanity. Maybe you could program the robots to be moral, kind, virtuous, just. Of course, the problem with that is they actually have free will. They could, like humans, they could always rebel against that and act contrary to the way they've been programmed. So, the last thing I'm going to say is, this is even more speculative. What if who you are is a function of your mental circuitry? Your memories are lodged there, your self-awareness is lodged there. What if that could be electronically reproduced and put in the cloud? And then you would live forever, unless the platform crashed. You would live forever in the cloud. And there's actually several billionaires across the globe who are dumping money into that. who want their consciousness to survive virtually, so that they will continue to have emotions, thoughts, and self-awareness. Presumably, they would not have bodies, so that there would be an ethereal, disembodied existence of a person forever, where forever you could recall your memories, you could still have emotions, you could imagine things, you could have thoughts, and that would not cease.
That's really an ego.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just almost, to me, incomprehensible.
And you wouldn't want it.
Good luck if you want to have me around for another.
Yeah, that which raises another question. Could the eternal existence of some people in the cloud be vetoed? Because you don't want them around forever. And it is sort of like, I think, the ultimate act of narcissism, that I want my consciousness to continue indefinitely. Now, the folk who are in favor of it say, well, that's really no different than the standard belief in going to heaven. A disembodied existence for all eternity. So he said, this isn't all that scary. Christians have always wanted it. But again, the problem is the older view, like being saved, going to heaven, living eternally, an afterlife, had been the prerogative of God. And now it would be the prerogative of us. If you had enough money, if you had access to the technology, then even if you'd been an utter jerk, you could upload yourself and survive in the cloud. Now, that's not anywhere close to happening, but some theoreticians are saying it's not impossible and it could happen, while others say, well, no, the human brain is so intricate that it's not likely that anytime soon, or maybe ever, we'd be able to replicate all the complex circuitry in our brains. So don't worry about this yet. Although others are saying, given the rate of development and innovation that have occurred in technology, it's not impossible that this would happen within a century or so. So I'll leave it to you to wrestle with that one. But the conclusion of this is the development of robotics and artificial intelligence does present a lot of unusual challenges to Christianity and the church. Particularly, should these developments be supported or should they be resisted? And if they do go forward, and it is possible to create conscious, free will, emotional beings, for people to create them, what do we do with them? What do we do with them in terms of legal rights? What do we do with them politically? And also, for us, what do we do with them religiously? It would change my teaching entirely if I knew that some of my students were robots. I'd have to learn a new set of skills, and it would change church life enormously. Now, this might sound fanciful and far-fetched, but think back 40, 50 years. Would you have thought 50 years ago that you could have a device that would tell you where you were and how to get someplace else and do it with a high degree of accuracy? Could you have imagined GPS? Could you have imagined the internet? 30 years ago, could you have imagined the internet? That there would be a way in which to access instantaneously information from all over the world. And could you have imagined that there could be electronic devices that could play chess and win? Electronic devices that could solve complex institutional problems. You put in your flow chart and the structure of your institution and type in a problem, and it'll spit out an answer, and that often the answer is accurate and practicable. So given that, the things we've been talking about might not be as science fiction-y as immediately meets the eye. And it does lead to the vision of a new world where the ethical and theological implications have not been thought through, and we are basically shooting from the hip. Yeah.
I can see, because of competition among countries,
Yeah.
that this stuff, you can't just say we're not going to do this because other countries will do it.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's what happened with gunpowder. You know, Egypt says, well, we're not going to do it. But the Ottoman Empire said, oh, we will. And they won.
Therein lies the threat of AI warriors. I mean, AI warriors are the classic. If it's autonomous and it can go out there and kill humans wearing the other uniform, why wouldn't you do it?
Yeah. Well, that's what drones are.
Yep.
Yeah,
we're working on it.
Yeah, they fly, but what if you had like the land-based equivalent of a drone
Yep.
that is programmed to destroy the enemy?
Yeah.
And that probably will happen.
Yeah. Soon.
And hiding when there are infrared sensors that can detect people in buildings from 100 feet up
Yeah.
makes off the grid not really work well
Yeah.
if you really want to try to hide from it.
Yeah. I had a student who wanted to really be off the grid. He lived in downtown Lancaster. So he mapped out all the places where there were cameras or electronic devices that could detect his movements. And he would walk through alleys and through people's yards in order to avoid detection. But finally he realized that was impossible. Yeah.
But it seems to me, up to a point, at least in my mind, you need someone that's smart enough to evaluate the output to determine whether what you're getting is true or not. Because if you strictly go by machine logic, sooner or later, you're gonna end up with a total mess. Even buildings that are being built now with computers, you have to have someone that looks at it and says,
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense.
Right.
Because there's always a glitch somewhere that can cause catastrophic failure eventually, but you gotta catch it early. Some brain has to be smart enough to catch that, I would think. I may be wrong.
Right. Because it's not possible to program in all the variables that go into making a decision. At least right now it's not. So you probably all have the phenomenon of GPS, where you don't know the name of the street or the street address, you don't know the number, so you just type in the city. And what it will do is take you to the geographic center of the city.
Yeah.
So I wanted to go to someplace in Princeton University. I didn't know where. I didn't type in university, I just typed in Princeton. So it took me to the middle of an industrial park, which was the geographic center. So there are always variables that the machine doesn't foresee. Yeah.
Okay, since I'm guilty of writing the code that does these things.
Really?
Yeah, oh no, I wrote software, yeah, that's what I did. Anyway, I would argue we're gonna get there. I would offer 3 films, two of which, Bicentennial Man with Robin Williams, in which you've got a robot which is showing creativity. And one of the interesting early aspects of this film, the owner of said robot was enjoying the creativity of his robot, and but the robot was damaged and needed repaired, and he threatened the manufacturer with legal action because if he changed that robot at all, right, just repair the limb that has been damaged and do not touch the software. It's a wonderful film where he really does become quite human. I would actually say a CI robot with our conversation in mind. One could argue that Vicky, which is the computer central brain of the time, is actually far more correct than most people would be comfortable with. But then we've got characters like Commander Data, and I would argue Spock, which their inhumanity is a far clearer image of man than man's image of man. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. And the number of films about robots that basically become human and are smarter than humans, and more rational than humans, those are legion. Humanity always thought that science fiction was preposterous. You know, when H.G. Wells and others were writing novels, but most of the things that they thought about, like going to the moon, have come to pass. So I'm inclined to worry about these things. Luckily, it probably won't be in my lifetime, so I'm not going to be responsible for it. But churches and congregations will, all of us will.
But the conversation that you had relative to having them in your congregation is nonetheless the racial discussion. Is it? I mean, the other film is Enemy Mine, which comes to mind, which deals directly with racism. But as they emerge as more and more intelligent, we need to address them as intelligent, and mankind has always built barriers to prevent treating the others as equal. And yeah, it's going to be a bumpy journey, but ultimately you need to accept them if it's true.
Yeah, and right. And I think the problem is they serve us. You know, my computer serves me. Oh, wait, that's not right. It's supposed to serve me, and on a good day, it does.
And you feed it.
Yeah, but I do yell at it when it doesn't do what I want it to do. When there needs to be a command that I'm not familiar with. So we're going to be habituated to thinking of and we have been, technology as servant. But what if those machines become so sophisticated that they actually do have self-awareness and emotions and free will? Then there's going to be a clash from the way we've been habituated to treat them as our servants to treating them as some kind of unusual peer. And of course, a big question in the background is, if they do become that sophisticated, and the circuitry is as complex as that of a human brain, therefore it can replicate all the functions of a human brain, will they have spiritual needs? You know, will they have some sense that there's an ultimate something or other out there that should be worshipped? And that's something that no one knows. And it's certainly possible. But for the short run, before we get to that stage of uploading ourselves to the cloud, or having robotic brothers and sisters, the more immediate thing is, what do we do with the fact that right now technology has taken over some of the functions that used to be accomplished by the human brain? like memory and logical reasoning and analogical reasoning. In every aspect of life, how do we adjust to that? But more particularly, how do we adjust to that in terms of church life? What do we do with sermons if many people will not see the logical connections between the points in the sermon and might not remember it? Increasingly it's becoming common for folk to record lectures, record sermons, which means that, among other things, they're not paying as much attention as they used to. Now, it is a good thing that you can summon it up on your device to review it. That's a good thing. But the fact that folk feel it's less incumbent upon them to pay attention is a bad thing, I think, and will have a big impact on the way sermons are delivered, teaching episodes happen, and everything in our common life. And what do we do about creativity? Will that decline as more and more of our creative functions are assumed by electronic devices? Right now, you can, it's been around for a while, you can get a program, take a picture of something, photograph of something, put it in the computer, and then tell the computer to paint this person's portrait in the style of Rembrandt. And it will do it. And it will look pretty close to Rembrandt. Now, if we become reliant upon that, what will that do to actual human beings as artists? And the same thing's true of music. You can type in, I want a sonata in the style of Mozart, and here's the key, here's the meter, do it. And it will. It'll sound roughly like Mozart. So what will that do to musical composition, to the creation of visual artwork, the creation of anything, as computers eventually will probably be able to do it better than a human being. Paint better, compose better. And what will that do to our lives as Christians? Because creativity and imaginative thinking has always been part of the Christian life. And what if that starts to atrophy? And a big one is what we do as Christians ethically, politically, about the probable disappearance of a whole swath of jobs and the rise in economic frustration and therefore anger, which is looming on the horizon across the world. A lot of the rise of extreme right-wing politics comes from that threatened lower working class who see their jobs disappearing. Usually they misanalyze the source of the problem and think it's immigrants or outsourcing. But it's really robotics. And that's not going to change. So there's a lot of issues on the horizon in the short term for Christians. And then in the longer term, even more serious, sweeping, and perplexing questions. Like, will robots have souls? Will robots be able to worship? How do we treat robots? Will robots control us? Is this development a rebellion against the creative sovereignty of God? Are we becoming a little too full of ourselves? Well, I don't have the answers to these questions, so I will leave them to you. Some of them need to be addressed fairly immediately, but some do not. Some are more long-term, and hopefully we'll have time to think and pray about these things. What I'd like now is other reflections, particularly is the development of robotics, of artificial intelligence. Is that a good thing, basically a good thing or a bad thing?
I think the jury's still out.
Too early to tell.
Too early to tell.
And we don't really get a vote.
Yeah,
It's going to happen.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's another, another spiritual problem, because for some people that leads to a sense of, you know, we don't get a vote, we can't control it, it's beyond our ability to influence it, it's just gonna happen, which leads to a sense of powerlessness and kind of helplessness.
Ultimately, I think all things are determined by how they are used. Ultimately, robotics can be the greatest thing that could possibly come along, and by the same token, it could be the worst thing that ever came along. And again, we're saying it depends who's in charge, right?
So the jury's out, and it depends on how we use them.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can look at the upside and the downside of the internet, social media.
Yeah.
The upside and the awful
Yeah.
downside.
Yeah, it has an upside, probably has a downside. For me right now, the biggest downside is the displacement of jobs. It had been said by the defenders of robotics that in industry and agriculture that the low-skilled jobs would be eliminated, or at least greatly reduced in number. But then it was said, but those people who were engaged in the low-skilled jobs could be absorbed by more creative professions. That instead of like working in McDonald's, they could become artists and musicians. But then it was pointed out, no, robots are doing that better already. So what are they gonna do?
To your original question, I think that the robotics and so forth can start out being a good thing, but I think man will eventually use it for bad purposes.
Like atomic energy, yeah.
Yeah, 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 that's true. That's a good example.
Sooner or later, somebody sees a development in technology as contributing to their ability to seize power, either personally or collectively as a nation.
In the infancy of the internet, I'm talking maybe 89, 90, I heard a statistic that in the amount of dollar volume, there was like $1 billion worth of commerce already happening. There was $9 billion worth of pornography and sex trafficking and all that end of it happening. And I can't even begin to imagine what those numbers are now.
Yeah, yeah. Which is something we didn't talk about, the economic impact, except in regard to some people are going to lose, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. But what's the economic impact globally is another matter. The internet did increase global productivity, and it has. And that's a good thing. It's also contributed probably to a greater disparity in the distribution of the global wealth. And so it's too early to tell what will robots do to the global economy. I was talking to a friend in Costa Rica where wages are low, taxes are low, so many American and European countries relocated to Costa Rica back in the 80s and 90s. And now they're complaining that those factories are closed. And they've actually moved back to the United States and back to Europe, where they can be done largely electronically. And they said, so the global economy doesn't need us as a source of cheap labor. It doesn't need us as a market because it can sell products, more products to economically well-off North Americans and Europeans, just sell them more stuff. So they don't need us as a market, they don't need us as a source of labor. We have bananas, but that's not, and coffee, but that's, it's dangerous to have a single crop economy. So they were saying pretty soon, we're just gonna be irrelevant to the global economy, and we'll probably be back to subsistence farming.
Well, but that's why countries like Costa Rica have turned to ecotourism. Because
Yes.
there is a niche principle there where they
Right.
do have some resources that can't be replicated otherwise,
Right.
elsewhere that they can,
Yeah.
use. But yeah, I mean, I think, it really is a political question. What are you gonna do with the AI or robots or anything like that? You could end up in a kind of world like from WALL-E where, the robots are doing all of the work and the people are doing, enjoying the gains. It's not gonna really happen, but you probably do have to consider wealth distribution, because it's just going to, make the haves have more and the have-nots have less.
Right, and the folk who own and control and develop the robots would be the haves. And then the folks who lost their jobs to robots would be the have-nots, and that number would grow.
Can you leave us with some good news?
It's gonna get warmer tomorrow.
True.
Yeah, and I don't want this to be unadulterated bad news, because the good news is a lot of essential functions can be done better and more efficiently by artificial intelligence, and that has liberated us from all kinds of tasks that were kind of onerous, like reading maps, and trying to figure out where you are, and getting lost and stopping at a gas station and calling somebody up to say, where am I and how do I get there? So it has made life easier and more convenient in many ways, especially for myself as a scholar, where I don't have to go to Denmark anymore to read certain manuscripts. I can just find them online. So, and I can even do word searches, so I don't have to read the whole thing. So I can just type in a word and it'll show me every time that word appears, and I can read that sentence and see if it's relevant. And I can even ask it questions. So it's made research a lot easier, and has increased the volume of the production of knowledge in the United States, so that's a good thing. The bad thing is elimination of jobs, and I'll just put it crudely, a habit of mental laziness. And if that starts at an early age, then the synapses aren't there at all to retain memories of not only data, like people's names and phone numbers, but also ideas and themes. I think I saw a hand.
Only that, oh boy, did it go away already? With going back to your research articles, in the early days of Russia, the Russian Revolution, they redacted documents.